Friends, sisters, brothers, last night at the pre-gala dinner, when I was introduced, the guests were told by a brother behind me. When I was introduced, unfortunately, Owen Jones couldn't make it this year, so instead he sent his son. But friends, I must put these rumours to rest. I'm in fact 58, this is just a very, very convincing facelift. But friends, this is the second time I've had the great honour of speaking here at the Miners' Gala. And the first time it was one of the greatest honours of my life. And today it remains just as much an honour as it was then. Now friends, my great-grandfather, he was a railwayman back in 1926, and he downed his tools in solidarity with the miners during the general strike. He had his wages docked, and I still intend to get justice for him now, 90 years later. It's now, as we know, 30 years since the end of the great miners' strike, in which the government of this nation waged war on its own people, devastating entire communities. But I look at the courage and the determination of those who fought for their jobs, their families, their communities, and their country. I look for inspiration at the women who kept that strike going, the real Iron Ladies. And I look for hope at the solidarity shown for many miners for the struggle of LGBT rights and the role of lesbians and gays support the miners, now immortalised in film. Friends, our trade union movement is under threat, grave threat at that. So let us say, loudly and more proudly than ever before, that we are proud to belong to the biggest democratic movement in this nation. And friends, all too often the trade union link with the Labour Party is treated as a matter of shame, including sometimes by some of its own leaders. But Labour should be proud to be bankrolled by supermarket shelf stackers and cleaners and lollipop ladies and engineers, the pillars of this society. And if anyone should be ashamed of their funding arrangements, it should be a Conservative Party bankrolled by banks and hedge funds and legal loan sharks, the people who plunged this country into disaster and who now profit from its suffering. Now friends, this is a day above all else to remember the principles of our great movement. That an injury to one is an injury to all. That our collective power is infinitely more strong than if we were standing alone. But the Tories, as we know, they are preparing to batter our movement once again. A movement already trapped by the most stringent anti-trade union laws in the Western world, to impose a voter threshold that, if applied to Parliament, would mean most MPs being turfed out on the basis that their election was illegitimate. And so there we have it. There we have it, friends. One rule for Tory ministers, another rule for train drivers and supermarket workers and nurses. Now, my friends, in this country of ours, the defenders of all injustice, they want us to believe that injustice is a bit like the weather. That you can complain about it raining, but there's nothing that you can do about it. But friends, I don't believe that injustice is just a fact of life. That is just the way the world is, that we've got to grit our teeth and we've got to take the blows. It's a nonsense. Injustice is created, it is contrived, it is manufactured. And if human beings can create injustice, then human beings can eradicate injustice as well. Now friends, I know many of us were still reeling from the exit poll, that it still feels sometimes like 1 minute past 10 on May the 7th. But that moment must pass. We have picked ourselves up, we have dusted ourselves off, and we are all here ready to fight back. And yes, Labour failed to offer an inspiring alternative. In Scotland, in England, north and south, and in Wales as well. They failed to challenge the myth, the greatest lie in British politics, that the reason we have this economic mess is because the last Labour government spent too much money on schools and hospitals and teachers and nurses, spending the Tories backed pound for pound. But friends, their failure is theirs, it's not ours. And it is no vindication for those who rule over us. Just look at the record of this government. The weakest economic recovery since the 19th century. The longest fall in workers' pay packets since Queen Victoria sat on the throne of this country. A promise to wipe out the deficit in one parliament. They didn't even get through half. To pay the debts, they added more debt than every single Labour government in history put together. But friends, they have turned terrible failure into success because of a pathetic, supine media and a weak opposition. And as things stand, the official opposition has gone AWOL. Well, friends, it is our responsibility, every single person here, to fill that vacuum. We are the official opposition today. And it's time we stop letting them get away with it. It's time we stop letting them get away with it. Last week, the cheek, the audacity, the shamelessness of trumpeting a living wage that is nothing of the kind, while representing and introducing a budget that is one of the worst attacks on the working poor in generations in this country. Now, as independent economists have pointed out, millions of low-paid workers, they're going to have their pockets emptied in the years to come. Let's think about that in human terms. Let's think about the supermarket workers and cleaners and bin collectors, the people who keep this country ticking through their hard graft day after day. But for all too many of them, in the years to come, their homes, they will be colder. Their children, they will have fewer hot meals in their bellies. Their nights, they will be more sleepless as bills loom ever more ominously. Life will become harder and harsher and more difficult than it already is. And the Tories hope this misery and insecurity will be silent, will be airbrushed out of existence. So friends, we have a duty. We have a responsibility to make sure that does not happen. We must all speak out. We must tell the truth about what's happening to this country. We must speak out about the fact that most people in poverty are in work, getting up in the morning to earn their poverty day after day after day. That 5 million languish on social housing waiting lists, deprived of that basic right, that need, that aspiration to have a home they can afford for them and their kids. That millions of Britons have been driven into the arms of private landlords charging rents they can't afford, with tenancies that have no basic security. That oligarchs snap up new build properties in the centre of London, a booming, wealthy, rich country, whilst 1 in 4 young people grow up in an overcrowded home, their health, their education, their well-being, all damaged as a consequence. That hundreds of thousands of our fellow citizens are driven to food banks. Friends, this is the 6th biggest economy on the face of the earth, and the poorest are forced to depend on charities to satisfy that most basic of human needs, to eat. What an absolute national scandal and outrage that can happen in Britain in 2015. That disabled people are having their precious, desperately needed support stripped away from them. And if the test of a decent society is how we treat those who are sick and disabled, then my word, how this country has failed. But friends, we could go on, the burgeoning self-employed who aren't budding Alan Sugars, but people deprived of pensions, of paid leave, of any basic rights, of falling wages and a lack of work, of young people getting text messages at 6 o'clock in the morning telling them if they have any work that day, like a return to dock workers who marched to the yard and they stuck their hands up hoping to get to work, often to go home disappointed. But this is what they're always trying to do. and it can never be said enough. They are trying to turn constantly our justifiable anger at the situation that this country is in, away from those at the top to people's neighbours down the streets instead. They say to low-paid workers, whose wages have been slashed by their bosses, whose in-work benefits have been cut by this government, don't be angry with the government. Don't be angry with your bosses. Envy the unemployed scrounger living in so-called luxury down the road. They say to private sector workers whose pensions have been decimated, one of the great scandals of our time. Don't be angry with your boss. Envy the nurse, the teacher down the road who still has a pension. Why should they when you don't? And they say to people who can't get a home they can afford to live in because governments won't build those housing, or they can't get secure, well-paid jobs because they've been stripped from our economy. Don't be angry with the powerful. Envy instead the immigrant getting a home or the job that should be yours instead. And do you know what they're saying? Don't be angry at the fact you're being robbed. Be angry your less deserving neighbour hasn't been robbed quite as much as you have. The politics of divide and rule. Because they know we're not angry with each other, we're not angry with them. The people at the top, the bankers who plunged us into disaster, the poverty-paying bosses, the legal loan sharks, the tax dodgers, the real villains of modern society. But friends, as Tony Benn, who died last year, and I miss him so very much, as so many of us do here today, he said the way you get change is the burning flame of anger at injustice and the burning flame of hope at a better world. It is our responsibility, when there is so much anger and fear, to go out and give people hope. And that is a society where all in work have a genuine living wage to support them and their families, where we give councils the power to build homes again, to create jobs, to bring down the social housing waiting list, to bring down the housing benefit bill as well. But homes, as Nye Bevan once spoke about, to create mixed communities, where, as he said, to recreate the lovely features of the English and the Welsh village, where the butcher and the doctor live next door to each other. Friends, where, like countries like Germany, we confront our environmental crisis that looms over us by having an industrial strategy to create the renewable energy jobs of the future, where we have publicly owned investment banks to rebuild our economy, where we use quantitative easing not to rebuild the bank balances of the big banks, but for infrastructure projects that create jobs, where our privatised, inefficient railway service, where it is cheaper to fly halfway across the world than it can be to travel by train in your own country, that as each franchise expires, we bring them back under the control of the people of this nation. Where workers have rights, where they're not commodities to be hired and fired and disposed of at a whim. If rights are good enough for workers in Europe, they're good enough for workers in this country as well. Now, I'm backing a candidate for the Labour leadership who backs all these things and so much more. A man of principle, of conviction, of determination, and as you know, his name is Jeremy Corbyn. And the thing about Jeremy is this: he marched against Saddam Hussein when our government was arming him as he gassed the Kurds. Jeremy Corbyn marched against apartheid when our government was calling the ANC terrorists. He marched for LGBT rights when he was told that was a loony left thing to do. He called for negotiations in Northern Ireland when that was dismissed as extremist. Time and time and time again, he has been vindicated. And as he was vindicated then, he will be vindicated now. But friends, to wrap up, friends, it's up to all of us. The struggle is passed on from generation to generation. Our ancestors pass on a baton, and we must grab that baton with courage and determination. Social progress and social justice. It's not a linear story. It's not a story of victory followed by victory. It's a tale of bitter setbacks and defeats, of terrible sacrifice, of horrendous cost, that all followed by eventual triumph. The early trade unionists, they were persecuted, like the Tolpuddle martyrs who were deported to Australia for organising a trade union. But workers did win rights in this country. Women and men, when they marched to St. Peter's Square in Manchester in 1819 to demand the right of the people to determine the future of their own country, they were charged at by cavalry and maimed and killed. And the Chartists, the world's first great working class political movement, as they fought for all men, regardless of class, to have a vote, they faced the full force of the state. But did democracy not prevail in time? The suffragettes, demonised in their time as anarchists and terrorists, locked up in prisons and force-fed, but did women not win the right to vote in this country? And those who fought for a welfare state, who were belittled and ridiculed and dismissed, but was the welfare state not built? And those who fought racism and sexism and homophobia, who were battened by police officers, who were spat at in the streets, but did discrimination and prejudice not face hammer blows? So much bitter defeat, so much sacrifice. But in the end, we saw these great triumphant victories because people stood up and they fought for justice. Now friends, at times of victory we learn from those ancestors not to be triumphalist and complacent, and at times of defeat not to be despondent and despairing. But the one thing we always learn is this: everything we have, all our rights and all our freedoms, they were not given to us by the goodwill and generosity of the powerful. They were fought for from below by people with huge sacrifice and huge costs. Your mothers, your fathers, your grandmothers, your grandfathers, your ancestors before them. Friends, we stand on the shoulders of giants, and we must show the same determination and conviction and hope that they showed. Because if we do, if we show that determination, if we show that hope and conviction and foresight that these people showed against far more insurmountable odds than ourselves, then we will build a new society. Not a society run as a racket for those at the top, but a society run in the interests of the real wealth creators, working people. Let's stand together, let's fight together, and friends, let's win these battles together. Thank you.
I think the future of the movement is